I have in the studio with me right now, my guest is acting Senate President Jeff Kessler.
Bobby, how are you?
I am fine. You are both a state senator from up in Marshall County.
Correct. Marshall, that rings true down here in Huntington, right?
Can't go wrong on that. And you were able to really not pull off a coup, but to make the correct interpretation of the Constitution and the separation of powers, and it resulted in you being elected by your peers to be the acting, are you called acting president of the Senate?
Exactly. When the vacancy occurred due to Senator or Governor Manchin's election to the U.S. Senate to fill the Bob Byrd seat, obviously it created a vacancy in the governor's mansion, and under our Constitution, the Senate president, who is Senate President Doral Ray Tomlin, moved downstairs and to act as governor, which created a void and a vacancy, or a vacuum, so to speak, in the Senate presidency position, and I was elected by my peers to serve in that capacity.
And if you're elected governor, it'll probably be reversed, huh?
Yep.
Acting as Governor Tomlin will go back upstairs, and you will go down. That's a can of worms, but it really wasn't really sorted out in terms of even filling a vacancy that occurs in the Senate thing. That needs to be done, but that's not what I want to talk about, because I want to get into your campaign. First of all, why are you running for governor?
Well, I'll tell you, Bobby, I think West Virginia is poised, in my view, at least to have what I'll call a breakout decade. I truly believe that, there's no reason why West Virginia can't be the North Carolina of the 70s and the Virginia of the 80s. I think it's our turn and our time to really break away from the pack. I believe due to the recession, we've always been at the bottom of the valley looking up at the top of the mountain, but because so many of our surrounding states are having trouble paying their bills and sinking, and we've held our own, we actually not only can play with them now, I think we can beat them and jump over them.
Okay, now there are 14 candidates in both parties seeking the primary nominations, and on May 14th. What sets you apart from these other candidates?
Well, what I tell folks is, when I hear a lot of the other candidates talk, they talk about where we've been. I want to talk about where we're going, Bobby. I tell folks I'm going to be the 2011 candidate with 2020 vision. My goal is not to be elected for 1 year or for 5 years. My goal is to get in now and to set us on a path that by the year 2020 that West Virginia will truly have the fastest growing economy in the nation, with the best health care system and the best education system. We need to start on a path now with the right leadership and the right vision. I think that we can start taking this state on a path to places it's never dreamed of going before.
Okay, what do you consider the most important issue facing this state right now?
I think right now it's as we come through the recession, and I've got a degree in economics, my undergraduate degree, and that's still
at West Liberty, I believe, almost won the national championship. Ran out of steam there at the semifinal.
They did, and actually their coach Jim Crutchfield is my law partner's husband, so I have a close relationship with him.
Maybe getting some offers for so many vacancies around. But anyway, elaborate on what give me the specific issue now. Everybody's for jobs and education and roads and health, but there has to be something that.
Truthfully, I think that West Virginia, due to the fact that we're sitting on what I believe is probably the richest natural gas reserve in the country with the Marcellus Shale, that this time, Bobby, we need to do it right. Not like we did 100 years ago with coal, where we sold all the coal and all the out-of-state companies come in and exploited it, took all the money, and created some jobs, granted, and created jobs in our state, but no real wealth. This time, I think we have an opportunity with this play to do it differently and to create wealth. I proposed that and introduced this year Senate Bill 491, creating the West Virginia Futures Fund, that basically would require that 25% of this increased severance dollars we're anticipating be set aside, can't be touched by politicians or the legislature, and spent for 20 years, and create an endowment fund, similar to like they did in Alaska with the permanent fund there that now has $29 billion in it. There is no income tax in Alaska, and every man, woman, and child that lives there gets a check for about $1,000. 2008, it was $3,200 per person for living there. Now, could you imagine how rich West Virginia would have been if we'd had the courage, wisdom, and foresight 50 years ago, put a few pennies a ton and set it in an endowment fund on coal?
Yeah, the streets of McDowell County would be paved in gold. But that is an excellent project that you have there, and I totally support it, because what we have seen with the tremendous coal reserves we've had and the billions and billions of dollars that are going out of this state, the residue and really the economic benefit when you compare the long-term health, chronic illness, and all, we're losing money on that. Now, what you're saying makes a whole lot of sense, except there is already a severance tax on the oil and gas in West Virginia. It's fairly middle road, maybe a little. Yeah. Would you increase that substantially and then have that amount go into this trust fund, or are we going to just take a share of maybe 5%?
I think you're going to see you're going to see the pool grow, number one. I think just because of the level of activity you're going to see your production, I think you're going to see an enormous exponential growth in the severance pool without a raising of a tax. Now, if that doesn't generate enough dollars, then I would have no problem with raising it because, particularly if they're going to export this gas out of our state. I saw last week and was a bit of trouble a couple of weeks ago when I read that there was an energy company up in the northern part of the state that was entered into a memorandum of understanding with a Canadian firm to ship our gas to Canada to create one of these cracker facilities that, frankly, is used to separate the ethanol, which is then used as a byproduct in the chemicals and plastic industry to rejuvenate their cracker plant and entire chemical manufacturing base in Canada. Well, if they're going to suck our gas out of our state and ship it not only out of our state but out of our country, then in those instances I think we need a significant increase in the severance tax because it is our opportunity this time to create wealth here.
Mr. Acting President of the Senate, when it's gone, it's gone.
Absolutely.
Now, our hindsight on coal is 20/20, but we need leaders who have the vision and the courage to say, look, we're not going to let this happen to us again. Now, I think the only way that we're going to come out is because the oil is going to be, the gas is going to be taken out sooner or later. It's here. It has to be taken. It's going to provide jobs and all, but what the residue and what this means in the future, all we have to do is look at what happened to coal. If we allow that to happen, and up in your area, the kind of damage to the roads, to the water tables and all that can occur unless there's good regulation. Now, there were two bills introduced in the session. Well, neither met what everybody wanted, but you never get what you want. But a bill was passed in the Senate, but had been gutted in one of the committees to make it almost meaningless. The House never acted on this. Something needs to be done. Meanwhile, one of your opponents, acting as Governor Tomlin, has said, well, we don't need a moratorium on permits. We don't need a special session to deal with this. We're going to let the DEP secretary, who's in the pocket of the industry, has been there for years, handle this. Do you favor a moratorium now on permits? And do you favor a special session to deal with this?
I absolutely favor a special session. There's no reason why we can't, and we should, and we must show the proper leadership in passing a regulatory framework. Now, granted, the Senate passed a bill. Was it everything everybody wanted? No, but had a bill come over also from the House, there were two versions of the bill, and had we sent ours over, I believe, on March 2nd, which gave us a 10-day window to get a bill in conference, and I had my attorneys looking at the comparison between their working product, which we never saw passed out of their Senate House Judiciary and our bill, and there was a lot of room for, we wanted I think our bill maybe had 100 or 200 feet away from a stream or water. Theirs was 1,000. Who's to say we couldn't have compromised on 600 feet, 2 football fields away, so, the people would have our water protected. We need to have in place a regulatory framework that's predictable and is fair and protects the environment of this state.
Well, there were those looking for that kind of leadership during the past session. Now, there's blame on both sides. You're the president of the Senate. Rick Thompson's the president, Speaker of the House. You're both running for governor. I don't think there are games played there on the gubernatorial thing, but all these special interests, and you deal with them every day, come up there, the lobbyists, and they kind of crawl over the legislature. And to those who want the status quo or business as usual, anything they can keep back, anything they can defeat, and that's what they did on this. And now you have a governor, acting governor, and you have some of the leaders saying, a department head leader who has an obligation to enforce the law, saying, we can use a few more inspectors, but we can take care of all this. We really need the law in the first place. What kind of gobbledygook is that?
That's nonsense in my view. It is the legislative duty, and it's a legislature's duty and constitutional duty to set the public policy of this state by establishing laws, not the other way around. The regulatory agency, the DEP's job is to enforce the laws that we create, not for them to create the laws and to tell us what they're going to do. It's our duty. Right. We did not complete that task. I was proud of the Senate putting a bill out, although it did not meet. It was a pared down version of the original version of the bill. But I think it would have at least put a basic regulatory framework in place, set fees in place of up to $10,000, I believe, for permits, so that we would have the industry pay the necessary funding to hire their.
You have the framework there. It's just both sides didn't get together, and they should have, but that's water over the dam.
Right.
What I'm asking you now is that it'd be nice to have this moratorium, but that's an executive call, and it isn't going to be done. So it can't have a special session in the middle of the campaign that goes through the middle of May. But and it looks like the acting as governor won't call a special session anyway. If that does not occur, are you willing, along with the Speaker of the House, to bring the legislature back on your own initiative, which takes a little bit of an effort? But this is such an important issue that we need to have some people to step out front here, Senator, and get this thing going.
And that's where I think there's been truthfully a void in leadership. I mean, I haven't seen, particularly, and that's why having an elected governor, I would think, be helpful, truthfully, because we don't have a governor that commands the bully pulpit that somebody who's elected by 1.8 million people of the state. So, you have, once that happens, I think then the person, whoever that may be, will have the ability to say, this is what we're going to do, and guys, jump in line, because this is the edict, this is the mandate I've received from the people of this state.
We know, though, that if the current occupant is elected, that's not going to happen.
I don't know what he'll do, but I can tell you I will.
Well, that needs to be done, and if the person elected doesn't do it, you'll go back to the Senate, and Rick will go back to the House. And you guys get along okay, don't you?
Sure.
Y'all work together, because it takes a teamwork when you're dealing with 134 egos.
Well, surely, I respect Rick. He's a friendly rival at this part, but at the end of the day, we'll shake hands and be friends, and we'll do what's best for the state. At least I know I will. I suspect he will as well.